Hi, Lorrie Popow here. I've come from a wonderful egg show called Pysanky at the Gardens. While there, we filmed some wonderful tips from egg artists. Granted, the quality of the audio and video is not spectacular since we weren't in a studio, but I'm sure you will pick up some very interesting information. I'm sharing with you an amazing demo for how to do a silk transfer technique on eggs by my good friend Valerie Jurkowski.
The materials you want to have on hand are silk. You want 100% silk. I went to Goodwill and bought a bunch of silk ties and cut them up. String. I have some fabric here that I'll talk about later on what I need. You want cold water, and if you want to varnish these at the end, have varnish on hand. And to boil them, you'll use a pot with water in it, um, vinegar, white vinegar, and a colander to hold the eggs down. When you start with the silk ties, you may buy silk that says 100% silk, but in order to test it, because sometimes you have uh, fabric that's labeled silk and in fact it's not silk, you want to do a burn test. And basically what you do is you take a few of the fibers and light them with a lighter, and you can set those aside and just light them, and when they turn to ash, or they also smell like burned hair, that is 100% silk. If it melts, if it continues to burn, that is not silk. And let's see where my, thank you. This piece here was labeled 100% silk, and in fact, it is not silk. And I found that one of the reasons I suspected that is when I actually attempted to do the silk transfer, this is what resulted. And this was 2 attempts on this egg, and you can see there is some dye that bled onto the egg, but the transfer did not complete. Once I understood what I needed to do to test for whether it was silk or not, I went ahead and tested this, and in fact, the fibers did melt. They didn't have that distinct burning hair, burning coffee smell. To set the egg up to do the transfer, um, you want to start with cold water, and I have just a chicken egg here. You want enough fabric that's going to cover the egg. So I usually just kind of wrap the fabric around and measure it and try to get it so that there's enough coverage on both ends. You don't need really much more than that. You want to wet the fabric because if you try to just do it dry, it's very difficult to keep the fabric on there while you're wrapping the egg. And if you get the fabric nice and wet, and you can let the fabric sit in there while you're getting your materials together, or just as you want to wrap the eggs, you can just get that in there, but it makes the fabric nice and pliable. I usually apply the fabric on the right side against the egg. I believe that with silk you could do either side. I have not attempted to do the wrong side of the fabric, but I think it would work either way. So you'll see when you wrap it on here, it kind of adheres nicely to the egg and helps you work it a little bit. When I get to an area that's going to be rounded, I try to wrap the fabric as tight as I can against the top of the egg. Anywhere where the fabric doesn't have a nice, good adherence against the egg, you're going to end up with a white space. So you want to try to get that as tight as you can. And you just kind of wrap around the egg as much as possible. And even if you do have a few wrinkles here and there, ultimately what I end up doing after I have it wrapped is then I'll have a piece, and I just use an old bed sheet. It doesn't really have to be any particular type of fabric, but I soak that in the water, make that nice and pliable as well. And to help the fabric of the silk adhere nicely against, I say adhere, it's not sticking or anything, it's just snug up against the egg, but to help it hold tight to the egg so that you have a nice transfer, I use this bed sheet. Some people use nylon stockings. I don't feel like I get a tight enough uh, seal against the egg with the fabric doing that. I'm getting everything all wet here. And I wrap that completely around the egg as tightly as I can without breaking the egg. You can use eggs that still have the contents in there if you don't plan on keeping the egg. If you want to keep the egg long term, you want to blow the contents of the egg before you ever do this. So once I have it completely covered and nice and snug on there, then I will take string, and I use just a regular household cotton twine. It's a cotton polyester blend that I found at Home Depot. Somebody else in our group mentioned a butcher shop or a meat shop would be a good place to go as well. This is the brand that I bought, and it's mixed fiber cotton and polyester, just regular twine. Really, anything should work, but I like this twine because it's nice and pliable. So I leave a little bit of a tail on the end because I'm going to use it to tie at the end, and I just start wrapping the egg. And again, this kind of helps get the fabric nice and snug against, and I just keep working my way around the egg. I usually don't cut a specific length from my twine. I just keep wrapping and wrapping until the entire egg's covered, and then cut the end and then tie it. One of the things I learned early on was if I didn't have the fabric laying nicely against the egg, that you could end up with string lines, and I'll show you an example of that. But once I have the entire egg completely wrapped in the twine, I just tie it off at the end, and I may make 5 or 6 of these, and then I set those aside. Once you have everything you need, you set these into a stock pot. I use a stock pot large enough that my colander for washing vegetables, I just have a plastic one. I invert that over the eggs and then weight it down either with another pot or something just heavy enough to keep it from floating. I boil mine for about 20 minutes, and once I'm done, I dump the water out, fill it with cold water to cool it down enough to where I can handle the eggs, and then unwrap them. And I use a blast fix to blow the contents out because these will fill with water as they boil. You can vary the amount of time, the amount of vinegar. What else do we vary? There's several different things that you can vary on here to maybe control how much transfer, how little. I would be careful about the amount of vinegar that I'd put in, because if you boil it for too long and you have too much vinegar, you could erode the shell enough to where it makes it so fragile it breaks. So once I have all that done, I unwrap the egg, and then this is what would result. So this one is actually part of the back of the tie that was actually silk, and that had a nice transfer to it. Not all fabrics transfer exactly what they appear on the fabric. In this case, it's a dark blue, and it came out more black on this one. You'll see some of these gaps here where the tie, and I keep saying tie, but really it's any silk that you can use, but where it didn't, it sit nicely against the egg. This particular piece, this was a really nice Frank Lloyd Wright design. I really liked that design. And this is a little bantam egg. So that had a really nice transfer on it. Some ties transfer more clearly than others. I mentioned tying the string. This was an example where I really wasn't that careful about how I wrapped the egg. I think in this case I forgot to soak the fabric in water, so I had a hard time getting the fabric to kind of lay nicely. So you can see where the strings are wrapped around the egg. This particular piece here on a white tie, you can see that the background really didn't transfer. The circles transferred fairly nicely. Possibly if I had boiled this longer, or maybe had a little bit more vinegar, there may have been a better transfer. I haven't experimented too much with that, but here's an example of that same tie on a brown egg. And I think that the brown gave it a nice effect with that background. And one other design I have, I don't have that tie with me, but this is another instance. This particular piece of fabric transferred. I do have that tie. So this particular piece, you can see the background did transfer to a degree. This was actually a really quite nice transfer. I was very happy with that. This was one of my earlier eggs. So in terms of just making sure that you have soaked the fabric so that you can get it laying nicely on there, and then wrap it nicely. Um, the more nicely you have it wrapped and prepped, the better the transfer. And that's essentially it. In terms of varnishing, if you use the same varnish that you use for your Pysanky eggs, you'll get you'll have a nice sheen to it. These are all varnished. In this case, I used the Golden MSA acrylic varnish with the UV protectant. The dyes don't run in any way. There's no effect on that. And you just let them dry and then go from there. That's it.